This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for October 3rd, 2018, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Hey everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Christina is going to look into I before E, except after C. Mm-hmm. And then Adam, who's going after C, is going to look into whether Twitter is shadow banning users.
That's right.
But first, I'm going to talk to you about abortion. 2 episodes ago, I did a segment on whether fundamental value differences exist or not. Many listeners wrote in, and we appreciate their feedback and comments.
Always.
During the discussion, Pat indicated that Canada allows abortion in a certain time window, not in the late stages. I accepted his premise because I thought it was also true. But it turns out it is not. Lest we create myths on our own myth-busting show, I thought I'd do a short segment on abortion in Canada. Alternatively, we could say I'm honoring John when he was host and trying to create self-perpetuating podcast episodes.
I look forward to what you bring up in the segment that's not true.
We bust the myths we create. After the Canadian Supreme Court struck down Canada's abortion law in 1988, there is no federal restriction on abortion, but access in our provinces varies widely. Provinces are in charge of healthcare, even though they get money from our federal government. Currently, citing a Globe and Mail editorial, 3/4 of Canadians think abortion should be allowed in some circumstances, and more than half think it should be allowed whenever a woman wants. How did we get here? Pre-1800, abortions up to 4 months were legal. Now note, most Canadians mark the birth of our nation as 1867, although many native people reasonably disagree. So to call such a place Canada, meaning the country, is not without complication. Anyway, birth rate was too low in the 1800s, so by 1892, abortion and all forms of contraception were criminalized.
Wow.
From 1892 to 1969, there is no legal access to any means of birth control.
Wow.
Seems absurd by today's standards. Some doctors still provided contraceptive options under threat of being jailed.
Meaning some doctors do not want to provide contraceptive options, but they
did anyway, even though they could have risked being imprisoned.
They did anyway.
Because it was illegal.
Up to 1969.
Sorry. We're still up to 1969.
Yeah.
In 1969, under Prime Minister Trudeau, that's Pierre, the current guy's father, contraception is no longer a crime, and abortion is legal if a woman gets permission from an abortion committee made up of several doctors who usually only grant one if a woman's life or health is at risk.
So, Darren, did you just refer to our Prime Minister as current guy?
Yeah,
I think you did.
JT, full effect. In 1970, the eventually famous and infamous Dr. Henry Morgentaler is charged with conspiracy to perform abortions. A trial 3 years later, things were drawn out, charges were dropped, he did some jail time, kept opening clinics that were raided and shut down in different provinces. Skipping lots of detail, in 1988, full quote from HuffPo, in the landmark Morgentaler ruling, the Supreme Court of Canada strikes down the existing abortion law on the grounds that it violated women's Section 7 Charter rights to life, liberty, and security of person. The ruling states the existing law clearly interferes with a woman's physical and bodily integrity. Problem solved. Well, no. One of Morgentaler's clinics was actually bombed, and access is still very uneven.
Wow.
While there is no legal restriction, abortion is treated like many other medical procedures and policies and ethical guidelines that accompany them.
Meaning these aren't laws, but there are policies within the medical community around them?
Correct.
Okay.
Most abortions occur before 20 weeks, and of those that occur afterwards, they're usually because the fetus is severely disabled or would have died at birth or shortly thereafter.
Sure.
For some stats, in 2016, there were about 97,000 abortions in Canada, about a third in hospitals, and hospitals are the only ones that track gestational age. So if you're curious when it happened, you can only look to the hospital data. Of the 23,000 that occurred in hospitals, excluding Quebec, about 600 were after 21 weeks, which is about 2.6%.
So Quebec isn't keeping that data?
Or it's just harder to access because Quebec doesn't always play along with the rest of Canada's federal data collection.
The researchers have to translate it.
Mon Dieu. That said, the other 2/3 are typically under 20 weeks, so that drops the number to about 0.8%. After 12 weeks, there's about 13% of abortions that occur. A 2014 CBC article discussed Mifegismo, the two-step abortion pill that is used in 57 countries and is argued to be an important alternative for women without access to surgical abortions, say if you live in New Brunswick. Then I learned this drug was approved in France and China in 1988. So we're just looking at it now.
Wow, really?
I know. When our abortion law was struck down, this other abortion pill, which would make it so you don't need a surgical abortion, was already up and running in France and China.
Wow.
Now, Health Canada did approve Mifegismo in 2015, but it can only be prescribed up to 9 weeks, and it can be subject to a requirement for an ultrasound. Now, given that I said only 13% of abortions occur after 12 weeks, if you're able to take a pill, which would be allowed for abortions up to 9 weeks, that really would account for a lot of the procedures that might take place.
Yeah.
Or you wouldn't need procedures in that way. It'd be a different type of procedure entirely.
Yeah.
In conclusion, after many social and legal battles, there are no legal restrictions on abortions in Canada, although medical access varies dramatically by province. Most abortions occur before 12 weeks and very few after 21 weeks. In the future, I could see access to the two-step bill becoming more widely available.
So basically, in some provinces in Canada, it's much more difficult to get an abortion than others, is what you're saying?
That is very correct. So in some of the smaller eastern provinces, you actually have to leave the province.
So, Darren, when you mentioned France and China being the only ones that okayed the use of that abortion pill in 88, when we were just saying it was okay to actually have the procedure done, I found China a little bit odd or surprising. And then I realized, I wonder if that has anything to do with the one-child policy, because that came into effect in around 1979 or so.
Right. Well, you could see that makes perfect sense then. Anything that would lead to greater facilitation of the fulfillment of that policy would more likely to be approved. And with the upside, we'll say, quote unquote, of certain types of governments is that once a decision is made, it is just implemented.
So what I'll say is what I said on Facebook, that when I talked about this being law in Canada, I was clearly wrong. I'm sorry, everyone.
It happens.
Yep.
We all get things wrong
Hey,
sometimes.
I assumed the same thing. I thought there was a specific law, but...
And it doesn't look like where you draw that line is making a huge difference in the way people are behaving. Okay, there's no law in Canada. It doesn't mean everyone should just get in 38-week abortions, right? It just doesn't really make sense. People aren't really motivated to do that unless there's some issue with the pregnancy, right? Otherwise,
Typically,
they would have gotten it months earlier.
Well, 87% are before 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And, like high 90s are before 20. And now we turn to Christina for an exploration of I before E, except after C.
Okay, full disclosure, guys. I have a pet peeve about spelling. A big part of my workday is spent writing, so perhaps that's why, but it really, really bugs me when I see the word it's and it apostrophe S used incorrectly, or words like niece, which is spelled N-I-E-C-E, spelled N-E-I-C-E. A few weeks ago, Elon and Dina joined the panel, and when we were hanging out after the show, we somehow got on this topic of English speaking being whack, for lack of a better word.
Fair.
That led me to remembering this rule, I before E except after C. So did you guys ever learn that saying in school?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
There's a follow-up rhyme I learned, but I won't ruin it in case you're going to say it.
Right.
I went to French school. I did 1 day of English grammar throughout all of my school.
That explains a lot.
And was that part of it, Adam?
No.
No.
Okay.
Interesting. Well, this convo led to me looking it up, and that's when I came across this really great breakdown by Christopher Ingraham in the Washington Post. And it was headlined, "The I before E except after C rule is a giant lie." Since Wikipedia does such a great job of describing it, I'm just going to read their definition. Quote, I before E except after C is a mnemonic rule of thumb for English spelling. If one is unsure whether a word is spelled with the sequence EI or IE, the rhyme suggests that the correct order is IE unless the preceding letter is C, in which case it is EI. For example, IE in believe, fierce, collie, die, friend. EI after C in receive, ceiling, receipt. Now, how I remember the saying is I before E, except after C, or when sounded as A, as in neighbor or way. Is that what you had heard, Darren?
Yes, basically. The neighbor and way. Yep.
Now, this spelling rule would come in extremely handy, except for the part that it is wildly inaccurate. The Wikipedia article even lists out a handful of words that violate both parts of the rule simultaneously, like cleidomancies and eigenfrequencies.
Common words is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. But this rule's been around a really long time. There are grammar textbooks dating back to 1866, right up to modern day, that cite the rule. So that was one thing that I was kind of wondering, is it just something that, maybe I learned back in the day, or are they still teaching this? But it seems to still be a thing. Last June, a statistician named Nathan Cunningham at the University of Warwick did something really cool. He entered 350,000 words into a statistical program in order to test this rule. So Cunningham became interested after watching an episode of a BBC show called QI, short for Quite Interesting. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but Stephen Fry hosts it sometimes, and it's pretty fun because it tackles common myths. They claim that the I before E except after C rule actually had more exceptions, and that words containing CIE actually outnumber those containing CEI. So Nathan asked himself, just how useless is this rule anyway? And secondly, are there any modifications to the rule which aren't useless? Which I thought was quite interesting. So as the article summarizes, the program first checks IE versus EI spellings, and that seemed to support the rule for around 75% of the words in the data set. So IE or EI, the rule bore out. Words like relief, niece, chief, etc., just as an example. Now, as Cunningham says, if you're struggling to order an EI-IE pair in a word, there's an approximately 3-to-1 chance that the I will go first. Okay, so far so good. Next, he selects words with CEI or CIE. If we were to believe the spelling rule, there should be more CEI spelled words than CIE. But that is not the case. In fact, the opposite is true. CIE words outnumber CEI words 3-to-1. So examples are words like species and glacier.
But you have to consider how common the words are, too.
I was just about to say, are these balanced by frequency?
Yeah.
Well, you just wait.
Okay.
You just wait. So there really seems to be an exception to the rule at every turn. And even though someone pointed out the holes in the rule in the 1930s, it's somehow stuck around and even gone through a few other iterations. Okay, so to test out whether there were modifications to the rule that actually more closely supported it, he ran an analysis on every letter. And interestingly, a more accurate rule would be I before E except after W.
Wow.
Yeah, he cited examples like wait and weird. Okay, so what would be a more accurate description of this rule if we are to account for all or at least most of the exceptions? Now, thankfully, I didn't have to do this research. Merriam-Webster tried to do it for us. So, you guys ready? I before E except after C, or when sounded as A, as in neighbor and way, unless the C is part of a sh sound as in glacier, or it appears in comparatives and superlatives like fancier, and also except when the vowels are sounded as E as in seas, or I as in height, or also in ing, inflections ending in E as in queuing, or in compound words as in albeit, or occasionally in technical words with strong etymological links to their parent languages as in cuneiform, cuneiform, or in other numerous and random exceptions such as science, forfeit, and weird.
Easy peasy. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, can that rhyme better? People rate rhyming things as more true.
Fair.
I guess the question is, why are we still perpetuating basically a useless rule with this many exceptions?
Yeah, it seems pretty bad. I mean, I'd heard this expression, but I never really thought about what it actually meant because I never learned it in school. But I'm really glad I didn't because it sounds like it's terrible.
It's more that why don't you focus on the 5 to 10 words you're confused about and just memorize those in the right order and not worry about any other rule. From a segment about spelling to one where spelling goes to die. Twitter. Adam, is it shadow banning users?
That's a great question, Darren. I am a user of the not-so-great website Twitter.com. I've seen a lot of odd behavior on the site where certain users' posts were partially hidden or difficult to see, and had also heard the term shadow ban or shadow banning being thrown around in relation to accounts being censored. I wanted to investigate just what that meant, whether it was something that was happening, and what kind of restrictions are going on with this site. To be clear, for me personally, shadow banning was a term I'd only heard fairly recently.
Me too.
In fact, I didn't know exactly what it meant until preparing for this segment just yesterday. So, the term seems to have a somewhat specific meaning, that is having a user be banned, but having the ban be obscured from them in such a way that they still see their own content and believe that they aren't banned at all. Basically, no one else can see what they do, but when they go onto the website, it looks like everything's fine. In the strictest sense on Twitter, this would mean I have my account working, I post tweets and replies, and it looks like they exist when I read my own profile or look at others' tweets that I've replied to, but in reality, no other user would actually be able to see these. The term came into fairly common usage a few months ago, as many conservative news sources claimed that Twitter was shadow banning certain conservative accounts. So what specifically was going on in this case was that when users were doing searches on Twitter by, say, typing out the name of a Twitter account, certain users were not showing up in the autocomplete results. What I mean by this is that there is this sort of way that you can type and the results list automatically shows up while it's searching as it's doing it sort of on the fly before you either hit enter or hit the little magnifying glass to actually submit your search. The result of this would supposedly be that people would be looking for certain accounts and would not be able to find them. Now, when confronted about this, Twitter's response was quite clear. They do not shadow ban. And from the explanation of shadow banning I gave, this is indeed correct. They do not specifically do what shadow banning means. Now, those user accounts did still exist. Others could still see their tweets. They could see them if they were following them. Their replies would generally show up under tweets. More on that later. Further, if you actually hit enter on the search bar, those accounts would actually show up. So it's not a shadow ban, even if there was a bit more difficulty finding certain accounts. If Twitter was actually trying to shadow ban users, it wasn't doing a very good job of it, and that is a very specific way to find a user. Twitter claimed that this was just an issue with an algorithm which was eventually changed so that it no longer occurred. Now, it is worth noting that some other non-conservative, fairly innocuous accounts were also affected, making the likelihood of this being intentional or intentionally targeted towards conservatives far less likely, but it's hard to tell exactly what was at play because Twitter doesn't really explain exactly what's going on behind the scenes. So what basically occurred was not so much a bug, but the algorithms doing what they were designed to, just not being perfectly optimized. For example, if a search suggestion is ranked lower when there are a high number of blocks or reports on an account, this could account for this change, though with Twitter not being very forthcoming about exactly what caused the algorithm to lower the priority of these accounts in auto-suggestions, we don't know exactly what the factors were. In articles on some sites discussing it, there was a bit of a condescending tone, with some people talking about how shadow banning has been around forever and we should all know what it is, to which I was a bit surprised as I'd never been aware of the term until somewhat recently when this controversy started to come up. That said, it does appear that such a practice did exist as far back as the BBS days. I can't say I've ever encountered it in my time online. It does seem that it is done quite a bit on Reddit, which I imagine is where the term gained popularity and I think a lot of people learned about it. So, Twitter is not shadow banning. It is a conspiracy theory, so let's move on with our lives. That's great. Not so quick. Now, I'm not saying that there was an actual shadow banning conspiracy, but I will say that Twitter does a bunch of crap with tweets that I would almost describe as soft shadow banning, or something that most people don't seem to care much about, but some people are concerned about. Now, a certain change was announced in May, and that's an effort by Twitter to reduce trolls and spam. Algorithms are used to determine if an account is likely to be spam, a troll, or an other such abusive user. So these are kind of the words Twitter used to describe how great this initiative was. Twitter mentions that factors include accounts with unconfirmed email accounts, multiple accounts which seem to be owned by the same person, accounts that repeatedly tweet to or mention accounts that don't follow them, and also the number of times a user was muted or blocked by others will decrease their ranking. So some people will probably celebrate this as it might reduce the number of egg-type accounts that they'll be exposed to, but this is far from all that is caught in this very wide net, though what is exactly is caught is going to constantly being changes as these algorithms are being tweaked. Now, this could and does have the not terribly unintended consequence of hiding some highly polarized accounts. So these users, and this could be conservative accounts or liberal accounts or whatever, but some that are very unpopular might get blocked by a lot of other users, which could affect their ranking. Now, this would include high-profile conservatives and liberals, though algorithms are often tweaked to get around this. The mere existence of the blue checkmark to me seems to be just a way for accounts not to be affected by this. So a lot of people that have blue checkmarks might actually get blocked and reported a ton, but these aren't the people that you're not going to find in search results or that you're going to have to click show more replies to see because they got that blue checkmark and they're really special on Twitter. So what happens to all these accounts that are sort of determined to be of low value by Twitter? Well, they're hard to find in a search, and the replies to other people's tweets by those users will often be hidden behind a show more replies link at the bottom of other replies. So this result is probably something that most people who use the site are familiar with. You see a tweet by a user with some replies, but you only see a handful, followed by a show more replies link at the bottom. And you click on that, and then you see one or more replies. Now, this isn't some kind of next page, but it really is the option to show you more replies that Twitter's algorithms are trying to shield your sensitive eyes from. As of now, there is no way to disable this feature, so I would love to be able to say, just show me everything. I don't really care if these users are people you've decided aren't super cool, but nothing you can do about it. I personally find myself frequently clicking on these links and finding comments that I would have been quite happy to have read in the first place, but I'm not easily offended by big kid charged language. These aren't tweets using specific words or things that are flagged as being a concern by anyone. It simply occurs with all tweets by many Twitter users that have been flagged as being concerning. They claim that the algorithms should only affect about 1% of users, but I often find some tweets where half or more of the replies are behind those links. So, in some cases, it seems to be much more than 1%. Another issue is sensitive content, and this plagued me quite a bit with the TRC_podcast account for a while. Basically, I would see tweets which I couldn't view because they were blocked as sensitive content, but I couldn't even click through to ignore this warning, and no option existed in the settings on a mobile device to disable it. The user has to log into the twitter.com website through a browser to go and do this. This was a bit of an extra annoyance for me, because then I would go to the website and I would be logged in with a different account, and it kept kicking me in this loop. So I was trying to disable this for a while one day, and I just couldn't see the end of it. I did finally end up fixing it, but this was a bit of an annoying technical hurdle that I think just didn't need to happen. This appears to be cases where either a user chose to flag their own content as being sensitive, or an individual image or tweet or reply was flagged by other users for being sensitive. So it's not that a user is going to have everything flagged as sensitive, but individual things show up that way. So this was pretty much where I was ready to leave my segment when I finished preparing it last night. But this morning, things changed a bit. I decided to poke around with my own account. I don't have a Twitter account that's tied to my own name and my own public persona. In light of what the internet is like in 2018, I don't think this is wise. Now, with the scope of what's appropriate changing by orders of magnitude in years, if not months, and people digging through archives and the success of public shaming campaigns, I feel that having an anonymous account with a fake, silly name and very few followers is much more in my best interest. Now, I don't use this account for abuse or to circumvent bans or anything like that. I don't use it to mass reply to any specific accounts. I'm not using it to try to harass anybody. I occasionally post silly things, and I reply to things that when I think I have something to say. And I wondered how many of my replies, which seemed to get little interactions, were falling behind a show more replies barrier. So I logged in with the TRC account, and I found a tweet that I had replied to and saw that my innocuous swear and insult-free reply was behind one of those see more tweet links, see more replies links. And so was the next and the next and the next. And in fact, the only ones that weren't behind that kind of link I found were responses to my own posts. For example, I would make a post mentioning a certain user responds, and then my response to that user isn't hidden behind that link because it's sort of part of that conversation. But even things like I'll respond to someone who follows me, who responded to my own comment, interactions there, still hidden behind those links. So I was a bit annoyed at that. Am I shadow banned? Not in the strictest sense, But Twitter is basically hiding all of my replies behind an extra hidden level which cannot be ignored on an account-by-account basis, but can only be seen by users who are going out of their way to see it by clicking through to see that extra reply. And why am I on such a list? I don't really know. I can't say because Twitter doesn't explain exactly how their algorithms work, which I find a little frustrating. I do know for a fact that I am included on some auto-block lists. It's happened more than once that I've stumbled upon some woke account with tens or hundreds of thousands of followers who I've never interacted with and who would never reasonably have seen anything I would have posted with my low follower count, and I've seen that person has blocked me. This is due to lists that people compile using Twitter's own API. Now, an API is sort of software and tools that people can use to interact with Twitter's application, so they support this and they make this convenient for users. Now, they use these APIs to generate lists of people that they would consider to be potentially abusive. These aren't necessarily people who have been abusive, just people they consider to be potentially abusive. Many of these lists, including, I imagine, the ones that I ended up on, because again, I don't know how I ended up on any of these lists, are likely assembled simply by filtering for people who follow certain other people. So, at times, I think for 2 weeks I followed Jordan Peterson to see what was going on. I decided it wasn't for me and I stopped. Or I'll follow an account because I think it's funny and they'll say something a little racist and I'll unfollow them. So it can definitely happen that you follow someone who's not super cool, but you can end up on this kind of block list. That stuff happens. Now, I'm not saying this is why all of my responses are banned, but if Twitter's algorithms lower the rank of users who are muted and banned by many users, and many users also use these kind of public lists to mass mute and ban users, it seems plausible that the end result is that people's tweets are obscured because of who they follow, not because of anything they've actually said or done on the website. So Twitter is not shadow banning people in the strictest sense, but it is absolutely flagging certain users through unclear algorithms, making them harder to find in searches and hiding their replies behind show more replies links, which it has publicly stated is meant to hide abusive comments, spammers, and trolls, all while masking this from users in a shadowy way that they can't see. This has qualities of a shadow ban without any doubt. It's their website and they can do whatever they want, but I still think it's a pain in the ass. Apologies for the language. If you don't like hearing words like that, I suggest you let @Jack and Twitter.com know that they're doing a great job.
Thanks, Adam, for that great segment.
Actually, Darren, before you wrap up, I just wanted to follow up on the trivia question that Stu Pheromone asked on the show last week. We did have someone win. It was someone who goes by the handle Evil Eye, and he's won one of Stuart's books, and it's on the way.
Cool. Congratulations.
So that just shows that you guys need to listen to TRC the minute it comes out.
There you go.
Because
it like
you
it's
never
hot.
know what we're going to give away.
He was very quick with this answer, that's for sure.
Thanks for everyone who wrote in. And thanks for joining us once again. I explored Canada's abortion laws and history of how we got from there to here. Christina looked into the I before E rule, which is technically in some ways a rule, but a terrible rule, so probably stop following
Lies. Just lies.
Lies, a lying rule. And Adam investigated whether Twitter is shadow banning users, and they are not technically doing that, but they are doing something to de-emphasize various people's visibility. And on a personal note, this has been about my 10 years on the podcast, and it's been a fantastic journey. Thanks for everyone.
Yeah, good job, Darren.
Yeah, I finally caught up to you, I guess. I guess I never will, though. Wait a minute. Until next week, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
trcpodcast.com.
It's a good website. It's a great website.
It's just a good
Sorry,
website.
I fubbed the line.
There's your outtake.
Current Pat finds this fascinating. Future Pat's going to be really annoyed by this.
I know.
Zero
So-
words I've